quite often were really changing their home care routine to include products and ingredients that support and mimic the natural barrier.
Welcome to the Learn Skin podcast with me, Dr. Raja.
And me, Dr. Hadar, where we discuss all things skin.
Join us as we delve into the art and science of skin health in today's episode.
Hey, Raja, can you say the thing I told you to tell them?
Of course. We are board-certified dermatologists. This podcast is meant for educational and informational purposes only and is not considered medical advice, nor does it serve as a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. All opinions shared do not express the views of Learn Health, Inc. Let's get to the good stuff.
Hey, Raja, how are you today?
Hey, Hadar. I'm doing pretty well. I've just been thinking with all of this cold weather, have you been thinking about how to better take care of your skin?
Oh my gosh. I mean, isn't it what we do every day, right? I think as dermatologists, and the medical dermatologists always think about treating disease, but we do have a lot of maintenance work to do and taking care of the barrier and, just good daily care for our skin and so much more. And so we wanted to dedicate some time to talk about this. We wanted to bring an expert who can help guide us through this and maybe provide a different perspective, in the good old tradition of the Learn Skin podcast, where we take people from different disciplines and try to collaborate on skin. Shall we do that?
Absolutely. In fact, we're pretty lucky today. We're talking to Dr. Jen Newell. She is a naturopathic doctor. She's coming to us all the way from Toronto in Canada. Woo-hoo! But thankfully, these are electronic pixels, so we're sitting right next to each other. It's the way the world is connected. And in fact, speaking of connected, she has a clinic that's called Connected Health and Skin. So apropos. Jen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wow, Raja, I so I did it with the word connected. Nice connection. Thank you very much. And we are all connected, and we're all connected in our practices. I mentioned medical dermatologists, and there's other disciplines, and you chose naturopathy. And, we're always curious on this program why people choose the path they chose and how they got to their point. So perhaps you can inspire us a little bit by telling us your path before we kind of talk about some of the good stuff we have in mind. What made you go into naturopathy and why skin within naturopathy?
I say that I kind of fell into this by complete happenstance. I had my mind and my brain was set to become a veterinarian, and I had been doing like wild animal care and different things, and in undergrad got quite unwell. And so serendipitously wound up seeing a naturopath and having skin issues myself. And I went through, at the end of my undergrad degree, had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And my mother, being a mother that she is, said, well, let's go to the naturopathic college for a tour. And we got there literally 10 minutes into being there. She looked at me and she's like, this is what you're supposed to do. And being the rebellious basic adult at that point, I was like, you don't know anything. You don't know what I'm supposed to do. No, she was 100% right. And I went into skin because I'd had my own skin concerns and had actually been working in the beauty industry throughout the beginning of my career as a naturopath. And early in my undergrad, I'd worked for different cosmetic companies, Aveda and different ones like that. So it was just a natural fit. And working with business coaches, they were like, why aren't you focusing on these patients that bring you so much joy? So again, somebody else telling me what was very clearly right in front of me.
I think in life we really need good mentors, and sometimes you don't have to go very far. Sometimes they're your parents, and those are the best mentors. Almost by definition, they have your priority in front of them. So that's amazing. And what a good story. I kind of feel the same way that in many ways medicine found me and gave me the opportunity to be the best I can be. And so I wanted to jump into it because one of the topics we wanted to talk about is corneotherapy, and it's a hot topic. I hear this term going around a lot nowadays. Can you maybe start us off by defining what it is and what are the ideas and principles behind it?
Yeah, so corneotherapy is the philosophy that we've based my entire clinic in Toronto on. And it takes this holistic view of the skin and its function, considering the interaction between various factors such as the skin barrier, the immune system, and the skin microbiome. And it aims to address the root cause of skin issues rather than simply treating the symptoms. And it's a remedial skin treatment methodology where its core principles are being repairing and maintaining the skin's barrier defense system. And it was termed originally by the inventor of Retin-A, Dr. Albert Kligman, who I'd be remiss not to acknowledge that Dr. Kligman's contributions to the medical community unfortunately came at the expense of vulnerable inmates in Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia from the 1950s to the 1970s. But we got great philosophy, theories, and treatments. Unfortunately, the injustices, exploitation, and medical racism that impacted the primarily Black men awaiting a fair trial kind of shadows this.
Right. And so now the idea is that we basically care mostly for the stratum corneum. Is that the idea there of being the care for corneocytes, those flat cells that sit all the way on the very tippy top of our skin, the very frontier that confronts the environment? Is that the idea there?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we generally believe that those are the dead skin cells and that they have no purpose. But corneotherapy really centers around the stratum corneum and its value as a barrier to protect the inner layers of skin.
Got it. And so can you give us an example of what a patient might experience that is unique when it comes to corneotherapy? So are there any particular diagnostic procedures? And then maybe we can talk about some therapeutics as the kind of routine when a patient's come in?
Yeah, well, the current trend in skincare is typically now oriented towards skin health, which is a huge break from the constant peeling, over-exfoliating, and over-treating that we've seen in the past with the skin. So now today's consumers are way less focused on gimmicky fragrances and opulent packaging. And so now we're moving the philosophy to how do we help them learn about the health of their skin? How are we guiding them to gentler, less aggressive, less invasive procedures that support skin health? So we use tools at our clinic like a camera that's able to take imaging of the skin, show them what's happening on the surface, show them the terrain of their skin and how we can approach that and improve it. And then we can actually, throughout their treatment, take follow-up images and show them their progress. We also use tools to measure oil and water content of the skin because people are not well educated in what their skin actually is doing. And so our goal is to really over-educate and have them appreciate and respect that stratum corneum so that they're not constantly abusing it.
You know, I really like that approach and the term you use, like respect your skin. I feel like one of the more common things I see in my clinic are usually young people, but of all ages coming, and their daily routine for their skin, is like 7 or 8 steps. And, first of all, my parent, busy doctor mind goes like, who's got time for this? But also it seems like just so much harsh damage to the stratum corneum, really stripping that natural protection that we have. Now, granted, some people have pathology that prevents them from forming that effectively, like we see, for example, in atopic dermatitis. But by and large, the healthy skin doesn't need much. And so I want to stick with this diagnostic process for a second. So you mentioned a camera that I suppose it looks at kind of the epidermal topography from the top. And what is the goal there? Is the goal to kind of flatten everything? Is the goal to get more heterogeneous kind of topography? What is the goal when you show success to your patients?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that success really depends on what the goals are of that client. So quite often they're coming to us with concerns like acne, rosacea, various concerns. And so with the camera, we use polarized, cross-polarized, and parallel polarized light to show redness, inflammation in the skin, again, that terrain and the texture, and really based on what their goals are when they're coming in. Because as a practitioner, I can look at their skin and put together an idea of what I think are their main concerns. But if that's not what's bothering them day to day,
right,
then we have to consider that.
And then were you referring to measuring transepidermal water loss, for example, as kind of the functional barrier?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're able to measure like oil amounts. So we have the SD202, which is Skin Diagnostic 202 from Germany, that actually will give a metric for oil, water, and redness in the skin.
Very cool. Very cool.
Very
All
cool.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think it's really important to have objective measures as we go through this process because, first of all, some of the results are subtle. And a lot of times, like you said, patients have different kind of idea of success. And so it's important to have that discussion to say this. I can't tell you enough how many times patients come into me in follow-up and they say, it's not working out. And I always take that very seriously. But one thing I try to do is to say, okay, remember you were here when we first met 6 months ago. Do you really think that you're the same or even worse than what you were? And almost invariably, they are usually better. It's just they forgot how bad things were. And so that objective kind of thinking allows us as clinicians to really serve our patients well, to say, look, you're almost there. You're doing good. You are improving. It's not perfect yet. We still definitely have work to do to tweak it. And so having these tools that you're mentioning as objective measures is really key.
I wanted to piggyback on that, Jen. So what you're talking about is the sebometer, either the telometer or vapometer, but you said Germany, so I'm guessing it's Courage and Kusaka, right?
Yes.
Is that the one? So yeah, you have the telometer, you have the sebometer, and then you guys measure skin hydration as well?
Yeah, which is helpful.
You do that on every patient that comes to see you at every visit?
Not at every visit. We usually give some time between appointments to allow things to change. Because if we did it, let's say a month later and aren't seeing those results because it's still working to build and that cell turnover is still working, people get discouraged. So we'll usually do it at the 3-month and 6-month mark in their progress. And we do it in every initial visit.
Okay, so you've got this great mass of data that's got baseline visit, 3-month visit, and 6-month visit, and you've done different sort of interventions. Jen, this sounds like someone like a medical student or maybe a resident or someone needs to put this data together and put it out there as a case series and really show what you guys are doing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So speaking of it, I'm wondering, because I knew Raja is going to go to the research side of this, and clearly this is important. But Raja, hold your investigative horses for a second, because it's really important. You mentioned therapeutics, and I wanted to know what kind of therapeutics you offer. Again, all this in the kind of realm of and principles of corneotherapy. What are some of the interventions you can offer in office and then at home that really target the stratum corneum?
So corneotherapy is a very individualized approach to skincare, which works beautifully with how naturopathic medicine works. And we work in our office with a team of naturopathic doctors, acupuncturists, massage therapists, estheticians. So we can very much customize a routine for people. But quite often we're really changing their home care routine to include products and ingredients that support and mimic the natural barrier, because the skin's a complex and highly effective organ. And that stratum corneum layer, though apparently inactive in biological terms, still has metabolic processes due to the activity of enzymes. And so we do things to support that topically with their home care routine. So cosmetic additives that can be efficacious active agents, including things like a native phosphatidylcholine with unsaturated fatty acids, which is used to produce liposomes and nanodispersions. That hydrogenated phosphatidylcholine allows for the creation of creams and serums that are in physical and chemical respect very similar to the barrier layers of the stratum corneum. And so we're able to mix and make skincare routines for them based on their goals and things that are supportive for their skin. We include, particularly for anti-aging, isoflavonoids, phytohormones to bond to those local estrogen receptors, and acetylglucosamine, which is used for anti-aging and hydration purposes, and then barrier active components such as long-chain fatty acids, cholesterol, ceramides, and hydrogenated that phosphatidylcholine, as well as squalane.
So Jen, you've got me thinking now about clinical cohorts and subsets of like a patient that I might see. So if you don't mind walking us through like a couple example patients, obviously things are tailored and things are personalized, but just generally speaking, it is nice to get a gestalt of how you approach this. Say you have a woman that's coming in, maybe postmenopausal. What would be her typical concern that she would come in with? And what would be your overall approach? If you can take us through, how do you address, the internal versus the external in that sort of scenario?
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of working with a naturopath, is we're doing things internally while we're also doing things topically and externally. So for that postmenopausal women, they're usually coming in because of that loss of estrogen leads to loss of skin volume. We're seeing some sagging, thinning of the skin. Even they quite often come in to talk about their hair, but let's talk about skin today primarily. So we're going to do home care routine that hydrates and nourishes the skin. We usually use a very gentle moisture cleanser that does not strip the skin. One of our most popular ones is a milk cleanser with dermal membrane system, so things that mimic your own skin's ingredients and components. And quite often then we're going to replete and repair and replenish that estrogen using isoflavonoids, the phytohormones. Sometimes we'll use a compounding pharmacy for this. Sometimes we'll mix it ourselves in office. And then internally, we're doing things like bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, or looking at, if they're not looking at that, making sure they're getting their omega-3s and the key components to building collagen and elastin, like vitamins A, C, E, selenium, and zinc, and then working them to a point where we can do treatments that support that collagen production, like microneedling. LED light therapy is a favorite of ours. So there's a lot of tools in our belt to create a plan specifically for their unique needs.
Jen, I love it. I love that you took us through your thought process there, and it was really fun to listen to it. And, one of the things that I kind of wanted to piggyback on that is to say, if someone is coming in for estrogen therapy and you're doing some like phyto-based approaches, I wanted to kind of make a general comment, which I think is really interesting and what I've, learned with phytoestrogens over the years. Many people think estrogens and phytoestrogens are equivalent, but many times these phytoestrogens are partial agonists. So they don't overly stimulate the receptor. In fact, they'll come on and off and prevent the estrogen, native estrogen, from overstimulating. But if it's being understimulated, these phytoestrogens can get you back towards a balance. So it's really interesting. And a lot of people worry about cancer risk, but I think at least the studies in soy have shown it's just not true, especially with breast cancer. It's protective, if anything. And I think it just speaks to this different physiology that comes from phytoestrogens. And I love that you're talking about these approaches. And then you added the collagen stimulation at the end. So can I ask, do you suggest anything to also build collagen from the inside? Do you suggest protein supplements or collagen supplements or other herbals? What would be your suggestion in there if someone were to ask you?
Absolutely. You want to make sure that they've got their cofactors. So those key antioxidants, vitamin C, vitamin A, all those nutrients to be as optimal as possible to build that collagen, rather than just giving them collagen proteins and peptides, which are also helpful, but you also want the things that reassemble that within the skin. And we complement that with topical treatments as well. But internally, we want to make sure that they have all of the cofactors needed.
Wow, fantastic. Then can I do an alternate scenario? Because this is too much fun for me. Sorry, Hadar, but I've held my research horses back, and now I'm just like...
Now you're free range. Now we're all with you, and let's go after it.
I'm still holding those horses back, my friend. I want to talk clinical horses. I mean, this is too good, right? It's like...
Oh, let the horses run.
So now what if you have a younger woman, say in their late 20s, 30s, and they're saying, gosh, I'm starting to see my first wrinkle, or I'm starting to see some depletion in maybe a tiny bit of the libido is starting to go down, or some sort of energy is going down. Something is shifting and the hair is starting to thin, although I know we're not talking about hair, but they're still not postmenopausal. They're still having their hormone cycles and whatnot. What do you do in that scenario? And can you also add in, do you do any hormone testing like Dutch testing or other testing to aid in any of your assessments?
Yes, we definitely do testing in our office. We find the Dutch test actually very, very helpful when it comes to skin. I know there's a lot of debate about whether it's actually useful in perimenopause because of the fluctuations in hormones that happen premenopausally. But I find like the metabolism of those hormones is so handy when we're looking at skin concerns, particularly acne. So we do run that quite a bit in our office so that we can gauge and see how our treatments are going. But even with those women in perimenopause or in their late 20s, when they're starting to see some of those shifts and changes, like that first wrinkle, their hair might be thinning, I like doing a more comprehensive view. We want to see what their iron levels are doing. I see a lot of iron deficiency in women that's being dismissed, unfortunately, by their doctors as being, well, you're in the normal range, but it's far from the optimal range. We want to look at their vitamin D status, especially in Canada, because it's the Great White North up here. And while we're looking at it, I'm not against when people are looking at like treatments like Botox or fillers, but we also want to be mindful of how do we support natural aging and keeping you looking your best as long as possible. And sometimes we'll start integrating those phytoestrogens earlier, just topically, even if they're nervous about using them internally, or incorporating soy into their diet, helping reduce the fear around that. So there's a lot of things that we can explore and treat, and especially in those younger cohorts as well.
Fantastic. And then when you're talking about, iron levels and whatnot, some people struggle with taking iron supplementation just from constipation or whatnot. What are your tips to get the iron in if they are iron deficient? Because that is something that a lot of dermatologists have at least also started looking at with ferritin levels. They can be, quote, normal, but we know like functionally they're not. And so
Exactly.
I'm curious, what are your tips and tricks there?
We love magnesium in the evenings to keep those bowels moving. And I've started incorporating various forms of iron to see if we've got one that will be easier on the stomach. And I've been finding the liposomal forms of iron build those iron levels up faster and often don't have any of the digestive concerns that people are noticing.
I really like this discussion because a lot of times we forget that some of these findings that we have in lab tests in general are sort of an average. And, I heard someone say that those results are really meant for us to kind of survive, but they're not really meant for us to thrive. Kind of bouncing off your idea of really promoting health of the skin in general, what we want to do is get our patients to thrive and not really kind of survive. Your blood levels are just good enough. So I will say, and maybe challenge this, that how do we build a body of evidence to support this, right? Because every intervention we offer should have some kind of data to back it up. And I'm going to caveat myself and say sometimes the interventions are very safe, right? And so, even if it doesn't have to work for everybody, it may work for you and it's worth a try. So I guess my question is, do you actually measure this? Let's say you give them iron. They were in the normal range, but you're trying to push it a little higher. Do you measure the levels? To what kind of goal do you go with that patient?
Yeah, I had someone once reference this as the line of fine. And I feel like that's putting the bar very low to just be like, well, you're fine. Because no one just wants to be fine.
Right.
Everyone wants to be awesome. And so our goal is to get them above the line of fine. And so with things like iron, it's hard because that normal range is huge. And
it is quite wide, yeah.
It's
like
huge.
Orders of magnitude, yeah.
And so what we're looking at is, as we're bringing it up, we do retest to see where people are, but also we're listening to the patient. We have the beauty of having the time to listen to how they're feeling as we implement these interventions. And if they go from like, oh, I'm just exhausted all the time, my hair is shedding, to we get them now from like, let's say a 10 on their iron level to like a 30, and they're like, amazing, I've got energy out through the day, I'm shedding a little bit less, then I know we've made a shift. And while it's not necessarily empirical evidence where we can do a double-blind trial because of bioindividuality, I'm, as a practitioner, happy with that progress.
Right. And that is my point. I think that we have to always consider the safety of the intervention. And a lot of these supplements are very safe. And so you can't get to the point of overdosing per se. And if you slowly, incrementally try to bring things up and still within very normal ranges and then check with your patient, I think it's very reasonable. And we don't need to be afraid of this. Oh my gosh, nobody did that fancy randomized controlled trial. I have news for you. Nobody will ever do that randomized trial. And so what we need to do as practitioners is look at our patients and say, okay, how can we make you better? And this idea of being better than just fine, I like that. I'm going to adopt that. So I'm going to add that to my not just survive, thrive, live above the line of fine. How does that sound? Yeah,
I love that. And it's one where like, as we get them better, I don't want them to be on supplements forever. I don't want them to need those things forever. So we're also doing the lifestyle work. So, okay, let's get you eating better. Let's get you working on your sleep habits, because supplements are exactly what they say they are. They're there to supplement. And ideally, I want to demedicate you and take you off those down the road because everything will be better.
And so maybe as a kind of last thought, because you bring up a good point of how to wrap a lot of this stuff up with good nutrition, which is the building block of everything quite literally. And Western trained physicians, allopathic medicine, we're not, we always lament in this program how we're not well trained in nutrition. I think naturopathic doctors have that advantage. But what would you say to a run of the mill doc who's trying to do best, but doesn't have a nutritionist or a naturopathic doctor on their staff, hint, hire one, but also if you can't, what can they do? How can they guide their patient to get good nutritional advice? Who should they add to their network of providers? Is there a good other resource that you can suggest?
So like you said, hire the practitioners, learning things, and I think just keeping it simple. That I think we tend to overcomplicate diet and nutrition, and it doesn't have to be that way. And so there's food guides, the Mediterranean diet's a great resource. It's so easy. It's not sexy because it's simple. And I think everyone wants like the sexy, complex diets, but those are usually the ones that fail people. And so just keeping it really simple and referring to naturopaths, meeting the people in your community, creating a collaborative relationship with them, because quite often the MDs that I know and that I'm friends with, they don't have time in a patient visit to go through nutrition. They have about 5 to 7 minutes with a person, whereas I have the privilege of having an hour and a half an hour where I can talk about these things ad nauseum, which is great.
Yes. Right. And I suggest to all our listeners to scroll down on the program list, go to some of the episodes where we explored the expertise of naturopathic doctors in that initial intake, in understanding the dietary habits of their patients and how they go and guide them as working as a teacher, as a guide for their patients. I mean, obviously, it's a whole different topic, which we covered in other episodes, and we don't have time to do this today. But I think it's a great point to stop. And thank you, Dr. Newell. Really wonderful conversation. I'm sure that our listeners would benefit from that. So I want to thank you for your time and expertise.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Hey, Raja, have you heard of the JOID?
Of course. It's the Journal of Integrative Dermatology, an international peer-reviewed open access journal.
That is correct, my friend. The JOID spans multidisciplinary fields represented in integrative dermatology. This includes areas such as conventional treatments and pharmaceuticals, as well as naturopathic medicine, Chinese medicine, and Ayurveda, as well as nutrition and functional medicine.
That's pretty comprehensive. Well, tell us, who benefits from it?
Okay, the JOID unites experts worldwide, from research bench to the clinic, sharing new clinical studies, epidemiological investigations, editorials, case reports, and systematic reviews. So, if you want to know the latest and greatest findings in integrative dermatology, this is your journal.
Finally, there's a journal that evaluates and publishes the evidence in integrative dermatology.
Definitely. So stay curious and informed with the JOID, the Journal of Integrative Dermatology.